Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can finally fix your SQL queries and use proper string interpolation without having to worry about issues like SQL injection, which would be a big issue. Now, this applies to ADO.NET, the raw SQL stuff, Dapper, EF Core, anything else that you can basically launch a query to a database. So let me show you what I have here. I have this movies API, and I've commented out the original code, which was using Dapper, to show you how we used to do things in the olden days. So if you had a raw connection, you'd have something like this. I want to remind you that this API here has nothing but the Postgres client, and that's basically it. So we would create a command from that connection, which is that connection interface. Then we'd set the command. We're going to set a parameter over here to represent the ID of the movie we're trying to read. And then we execute a reader, and we have to pause every single item in the reader manually and know that the first thing in this case is the movie ID, then it's the title, and then it's the year of release. And this is the only item we have in the database currently. So if I just go and run this API and go to Insomnia and call the API, I can read the item fine. And if the ID is wrong, then as you can see, I'm getting a 404, but with the right one, I'm properly reading and pausing that thing. However, this is a pretty simple query, and I intentionally left it like this. It only has one parameter, but it's very common to have many parameters. And if you wanted to just add every parameter, you have to add an extra parameters.add call and pass the parameter and the value. But wouldn't it be nice if you could just do something like this, where you can just pass down the parameter like this with string interpolation? Well, if you use this here, then you're in big trouble. In this case, it's kind of fine because we're using a GUID type over here, and a GUID type can't go outside the GUID values. But if this was a string to represent the GUID, then depending on where this string is coming from and how it is validated, it can be very problematic because people can just pass anything in this query string, and then anything will be passed and sent all the way to the database. But this is a better experience as a programmer. Why do I have to have all this add parameters nonsense? And this is ultimately one of the biggest selling points of Dapper. If I went ahead and I just added Dapper in here, then I can largely simplify this code to something like this. I can take all this code and condense it all the way down to this. Now, this is kind of fine. It's way less code. It's basically doing all of that magic behind the scenes for us. It's very complicated. It's very performant as well and very optimized. But as you can see, there's a lot of magic happening in Dapper to make this even possible. However, we're still not able to simply say string interpolation here and pass down the ID like this and not have to deal with this newly allocated object that has to pass every parameter down and process everything. It's a bit annoying. So is there a way for us to fix it and basically allow us to use something like this in SQL? And the answer is yes. I'm going to show you the raw version first without using Dapper. I'm going to just go ahead and remove it. And we're going to do this by using interpolated SQL. It's a package that you can just install, and it adds some very nice capabilities. If I go all the way back to the original sort of nasty looking code like this, interpolated SQL allows us to do the following. We can say that the query is actually a new SQL builder, which we pass down the text, and we actually have to turn this into an interpolated string. Otherwise, it's illegal. It doesn't actually compile. This needs an interpolated string. And we're going to see actually how this is even done through the compiler. But if I turn this into an interpolated string, I can actually now go here and say that the ID is passed here. And to turn this into something that can be used later by the command, we're going to say build. So we're going to build our query. This is still not acceptable here, but we can actually say .SQL here. And now this will give us the SQL for that query. And this is parameterized SQL. And then we can actually also get the query.SQL parameters. And I can say this is a for loop for these parameters. I can push this here, and I can do something like this, where I can take the index of that loop, and then I can have my parameterization here, have this loop to amount for n amount of queries that are passed as a parameter, and anything captured in here will actually be parsed and added into these SQL parameters. If I just set a breakpoint here and debug this, in fact, I'm not going to set a breakpoint first and show you that this is in fact working. So let me just run this and go here and click this. as you can see, everything works. I'm getting the value. And if it is not the right one, then I'm getting nothing. But I'm going to revert it back to the normal one. Here we go. And then I'm going to add a breakpoint and then go back and call that. So let's step through everything in here. So first we're building this query builder. Now, how does this query builder even allow only interpolated strings? Well, you might know this is more of a niche feature launched a few .NET versions ago, but this accepts, in this case, a formatable string. Now, what is a formatable string? Well, as the description says over here, the formatable string represents a composite format string along with the arguments to be formatted. So it captures basically the template of the string and the parameters, which then you can take and do things with it. That's one of the ways to do this. The other way to do this, which can actually end up being more performant, is with an interpolated string handler. Both of these approaches will work. This is sort of the simplest one to work here. But once you do that, you can step over everything and you can set the command text to this, which is ultimately what we would have manually. It auto uses everything and parameterizes its SQL. Then if you see all the other parameters here, you can actually also get the format itself, which is the sequence of how things were added. So if you ever did like logging, old school logging, or old school formatting, actually, you would have something like this. So once we do that, we iterate over all the values, we get the value itself, we set it here, and then we read all the values, we parse them, and we return them. Pretty interesting, pretty basic, but it allows to use string interpolation in here. However, I really like Dapper. I am a fan of Dapper. That's what I use in production as well. And thankfully, there's an interpolated SQL.Dapper package. If I add this, and I'm going to just remove the other one because it sort of refers to the main one anyway, so I'm only going to leave the Dapper one here. I'm going to delete all that and leave just the connection. And what I'm going to have here is I'm going to say var query equals DB connection this time, not new SQL query or SQL builder. And then I'm going to say SQL builder, the extension method coming from that package. And then I'm going to pass down that query. And yes, that query here can include string interpolation and that parameter. And in fact, here, as you can see, we're not using the formatable string, we're using an interpolated SQL handler, which is a very optimized struct to do this. I am not sure if we can actually see the code. Let me just see over here. But I've shown this feature before. It's one of my favorite niche features of .NET because you can do so many crazy things with it. But basically what's happening here is this is a type that can represent an interpolated string, an only interpolated string. It gets a lot of details about the string, and then it's adding parameters and it's doing things like auto spacing and other SQL related things over here, as you can see, to store and represent the string and eventually give it back as parameter. So it can deconstruct it and get that value. And by doing that, we have the query. And if we want to get the movie, we can say query dot. And now this query has extension methods based on Dapper. So you can now say query single or default async, which is exactly what we had before. I'm going to say that this can be an allowable movie. And that is basically it. I have to await it. But once I await it, not only can I just have 3 lines of code that in this case look way neater, but I can also still use Dapper and have really good performance for my application while it looking better and it being safe. So the application is running. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to click that and it all works fine. And it is blazing fast. As you can see, all the logic still works. I think this is a brilliant NuGet package. It allows you to use one of C# best and finally extremely optimized features, because it used to be a time where string interpolation was not really optimized because of the way it was lowered. I've made a video on that. But in this case, it is just brilliant. It simplifies things so much, and I highly recommend it to everyone because especially for smaller things that you don't need to pass an entire object in, this is fantastic. But now on from you. What do you think about this? And what do you think about EF Core sort of doing something similar in the later versions? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, keep coding.